doing together. Oh, excuse me. We want to honor the work that we've all been doing together over these past 3 years. So we encourage you to show up, bring a friend, and let's have a great turnout for that. Today, we're incredibly lucky to have Janica Bowman-Lewis returning to talk about her new book, and she brings a couple of colleagues. And I want to get out of the way, so I'm going to hand it off to my colleague, LaKoya, to make introductions and get the conversation started. Thank you.
Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I'm excited to be here with the Messy Conversations team and all of you today, and to bring back my colleague and dear friend, Dr. Janica Bowman-Lewis. We promised during the last Messy Conversation we did, Elaine made this promise and came through that she was going to bring Janica back when Janica's book came out. So here we are, and I'm so excited. So I'll read her official bio, and then I'll add a touch of my own sauce. So Janica Bowman-Lewis is an interim chair of the Department of Writing, Rhetoric, and Digital Studies, and an associate professor of English at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. She is the author of several book chapters and articles on 19th century African-American women's writing and material culture, 2 children's books, Brown All Over and Bold, Nia Marie Passes the Test, and edited a 3rd, Dr. King is Tired Too. She has 2 books based on research about Black women and girls, Freedom Narratives of African-American Women, that was published in 2017, and then Light&Legacies, Stories of Black Girlhood and Liberation. Her current scholarship is on representations of Black girlhood and American literature and film. And I am so happy to hold this in my possession and to be here to celebrate my dear friend, because this has been a dream fulfilled. I feel like this is something that has been talked about since our friendship began. I know this has always been in play, and I'm so thrilled for you to have this accomplishment. I'm going to get out of the way because I'm going to participate, but I'm also looking forward to hearing what Dr. Michelle and Janica and Joy bring to us today. So Janica, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, friend. And I was telling the group as we were getting on, I'm back in the city today in Chicago, where LaKoya and I met but worked together with youth, with teenagers, adolescents, and literature, through Literature for All of Us. And I was in graduate school, and we were, cooking up ideas for the world, and you were writing. And so, to be back however many years later and in this conversation is wonderful. And I'm also so glad to be back with all of you all in Messy Conversations. This is number 3, and we've talked about a lot of things. We've talked about anger and rage, and we've talked about Black childhood, and just to think about the topics in this book, Light&Legacies. And I also want to thank Dr. Elaine Parker-Gills for motivating me, because she said, as LaKoya said, when you're done, we'll come back. So here we are, and so glad to be in conversation. And so today we're going to think about imagining Black girl futures. And I'm going to read a few segments from the book, but really, I want to have messy conversations. I want to talk with my friends and my colleagues and with all of you. And so I want to briefly introduce those who will be helping facilitate these conversations, but who are also near and dear colleagues and scholars to my heart. And so I'll go in alphabetical order. We have Joy Davis, MBA. Joy, wave your hand. As a scholar, Black feminist, womanist, and academic, Joy has worked as an adjunct professor in the Department of Communication Studies at UNC Charlotte since 2017. She's also a PhD candidate in curriculum and instruction, the urban education segment at UNC Charlotte, and a home scholar with a multidisciplinary intersection, including women's studies, education, and business. Her research interests include the pedagogy of high-achieving Black African-American women, specifically female collegians, Black girlhood, and I love this, soul labor as coursework, self-care, and women of color in the academy. Joy's two most recent research contributions were published in films as rhetorical texts, Cultivating Discussion About Race, Racism, and Race Relations by Lexington Books, and an upcoming anthology, Mamas, Martyrs, and Jezebels, published by Black Lawrence Press. And her column, Hello Queen, is published quarterly and featured in CEO Mom magazine, where she has published covers featuring actresses such as Kim Fields. And prior to entering academia, Joy spent just shy of 2 decades working with multi-location entrepreneurs, investors, luxury retailers, and Fortune 500 companies on the business development, corporate sales, and relationship management sides of the table. Yet, as she says, her greatest joy is being a mother to her teenage son, Nolan. So hello, Joy.
Hello, my sister scholar. You did well. Pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. Glad to be in conversation. And also my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Michelle Meggs, give a hand, who serves as the Executive Director of the Women and Girls Research Alliance at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. Dr. Meggs' publications, work, and research centers around expanding the authentic voices of women and girls in academic research, and she uses scholarship to embolden the work of local leaders so their efforts can have a long-lasting impact. She is the co-author of Dorona and a Virtual Kitchen Table Politics of Community in Black Women in Dorona, Community, Consciousness, and Ethics of Care, which was published in April 2023. And that's another book you ought to get a copy of, get your hands on. So hello, Dr. Meggs.
Hey, how are you? Glad to be here with my sisters, scholars, and friends.
Wonderful, wonderful. So we're going to get into it. As I said, I'm going to do a few short segments and then we're just going to talk. And the hardest thing, I think, for me, as this book has been out since April, and every time I do a conversation, I try to think about where is my spirit leading me to pull from, right? And so as soon as Elaine presented the opportunity to have the conversation this summer, the first thing that came to me was imagining. This idea of imagining Black girl futures. And I have 2 chapters in this book. One is Imagine and one is Build. And I'll pull a little from both. But this idea of imagining had me thinking about, as I wrote it, how we move from play and the games we play and being, outside. I love being outside, y'all, when it's not too hot or humid, like I said. But just seeing water run, seeing people moving about. I love that spirit and that energy. But how we move from play to possibility. And so I have a chapter that theorizes play for Black girls and thinking about how we make real these ideas that sometimes are only ideal as we imagine them, right? Think about it when if you're playing house, what do you want your life to look like? What's in the kitchen? What are we eating? Who's there? Who's at the table? We're imagining all of that. And even, with all the hype around Barbie and, we're creating these stories before, we saw them on the big screen. And then the other chapter, Build from Black Girl Magic to Afro Futures, thinking about how we get from this idea of Black girl magic, oh, it just exists, or it's not something we can put our hand on, to the real idea of what these futures of Black girlhood look like. And so I'm just going to read a few passages and I'll tell you kind of the context where they came from, and then we'll get into some good conversation. And so this piece is from the prologue, and it's on reading and radical creativity, especially for young girls. And I write, I recently opened a book that my 5th grade teacher, Mrs. Victoria R. Rogers, gave me in February 1993 when I was 11 years old. In it, she inscribed, "You will always be my star student." The book was Children of Promise, African-American Literature and Art for Young People, and it was the first anthology of my own people, even though not the first book I ever owned. Mrs. Rogers was my first Black teacher. My children now call her Gigi for God grandmother because they're trying to figure out how we're related to everyone we know. And she was my first African-American teacher at an integrated fine arts magnet school in Augusta, Georgia, which I attended from 5th grade until graduation. What I got from Mrs. Rogers was a magic of words. She would tell us to ask Mr. Webster when we didn't know words. And I still tell my children, go look it up. Stop asking questions, look it up. I remember being Louis Armstrong for our biography project and bringing my dad's trumpet from his high school band class to school, along with a recording of What a Wonderful World. I remember passing by her house one weekend during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic and her asking if she could still hug me as she pulled some goodies together for my kids. She is a living legacy for me and my family. And it's also a blessing for my children to know who taught me. I reopened Children of Promise on July 14th, 2020, in the summer after the COVID-19 pandemic re-exposed the social unrest that had been bubbling at the surface of Black America for decades. The foreword was written by Mary Schmidt Campbell, then Commissioner of Cultural Affairs, New York City, and now retired president of Spelman College, which was also the location of my first academic job as an instructor. Campbell writes, when Langston Hughes writes of our temples for tomorrow, or when Robert Hayden speaks of celebrating the life of Douglass, the life of the slave who reinvented himself, with the lives grown out of his life, the lives fleshing out his dream of the beautiful, needful thing, they remind us that as we strive toward that perfection, we are all children of promise. And so I'm a child of promise, who is coming to a promising adulthood, teaching the texts that I write about in this book. And it's a reminder as I teach and as I write that we are a beautiful people who have continued to build foundations, even when the ground is shaking under us. The first text in Children of Promise is a poem by one of my favorite poets, Gwendolyn Brooks, from Chicago, Illinois, where I am today. It is called Building. Brooks writes, when I see a brave building straining high and higher, hard and bright and sassy in the seasons, I think of the hands that put that strength together. And she continues, all little people opening out of themselves, forging the human spirit that can outwit big building boasting in the city world. So I'm not originally from a big city, but I know the spirit of buildings. I know the feeling of looking up at skylines, even in my current city of Charlotte, North Carolina, and wondering just how a building can stand so strong. And so the women and the girls in Light and Legacies, stories of Black girlhood and liberation, were and are those buildings for young Black writers, including how I came across or remember their work and what their characters meant to me as Black girl her stories. You might name them differently, but I hope that every reader writes a story of her own. So that's the first segment. And the second I want to read is from a section on page 13 called Black Girls Matter. And I write, why do we look to stories about these girls at this moment? What is it about their lives that matters so much but appears so little in their full representations? Drawing from Toni Cade Bambara's The Black Woman in 1970, in which then Cade anthologizes political and social issues, as well as ideas around identity, beauty, and nationalism. This book discusses representations of girlhood by African-American women writers to claim community and a transition in their sense of agency and self-identification from external to internal senses of belonging. Skip down and read. I use the lens of what scholar and critic Mark Anthony Neal calls the post-soul generation perspective to reclaim texts that represent and include narratives about critical periods in African-American history. And I'm thinking about the years before and up to 1954, as we think about Brown versus Board of Education of the Topeka decision, which influenced the narratives of Black girls, but also had us think about safety and inclusion in a racially oppressive nation state. But even thinking through 2017, when Angie Thomas, if you know The Hate U Give, documented the initiation and participation of a teenage girl in a social movement to respond to the murder of her friend by the police, and even to all of the tumult of our present day. I argue that the fiction, the poetry, and the memoirs analyzed focus on the power of Black girls, specifically to recognize themselves in media and culture. And so the stories, as you read, moved from memoir and autobiography from Harriet Jacobs, hiding in her grandmother's attic for 7 years. And if we can even call it an attic, a small little crawl space, while she imagined ways that she could escape to freedom, watching her children through a small crack as they moved around outside, but not being able to be with them for their safety and her safety. But then even thinking about Star Carter, as I mentioned, and Angie Thomas's novel, The Hate U Give, to Shuri in Black Panther, who I think is one of the more under theorized women in literature and in film, because she was the one who knew where the vibranium was and how it made the people move, how it made the Black Panther who he was. We have novels such as Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye and Sula, and the ways that attention is paid to how girls see themselves in literature. Also, who they're learning from, who is loving them, who is giving them space to be and to exist. And so I argue that we can look at this Black empowered literature not as just a beginning, but even as a renaissance. We're in Renaissance periods for many reasons. Beyonce is circulating, but we can think of it as a renaissance of sorts of how African-American women authors look to girlhood to think about self-construction, images, and ideals. This moment for me, as I was writing, started really in the 8th grade. I was doing a research project, and I was researching the 4 little girls, as we know them, that died, and a 5th who was very tragically injured in Birmingham, Alabama, at 16th Street Baptist Church. And what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. described in his eulogy of them as one of the most vicious and tragic crimes ever perpetrated against humanity. And that summer, I was 13, of the age that my son is now. And it just was running through my mind, how could somebody do that to people? How could they be that cruel? And specifically thinking about the trauma and the tragedy in the lives of Black girls. And so I start with an introduction that I call Remember, Requiem for Black Girls. And it's an account of narratives of Black girls lost to emotional, spiritual, and physical violence in the last several decades. And, as I started writing, I thought the urge to want to name everybody, because we'll never be able to do that, right? But how do we honor the lives? And Ntozake Shange, who we know from For Colored Girls, the choreo poem, she wrote in her book, Betsy Brown, no, this was actually in For Colored Girls. She just wrote, 1955 was not a good year for little Black girls. And just even thinking about how to take this whole history, and just put it wasn't a good year for little Black girls. And then going through 1963, and then going through the recent present, which at the time when I was finishing this book was 2022. And so drawing from the concept and histories of Black girl magic and the social impact of the Say Her Name and Black Girls Matter movements by the African American Policy Forum, I argue that we should talk about little girls in literature who help us think about what a reclamation of Black girlhood looks like and why, in addition to thinking about social histories of Black girlhood and where and how they've been represented. And so chapter 1, I think about thematic representations of Black girlhood, looking at Phyllis Wheatley's poetry and how she identifies herself in her poems published in 1773 that had a number of prestigious white men in society having to sign off on it, but how she says who she is through those lines and phrases where she can do that. Thinking about Olaudah Equiano's representation in his memoir of his sister. He talks about being separated from his sister, and her narrative kind of gets erased in 1788. Thinking about texts from the late 1800s to the early 1900s, a collection of talks given to Black girls, Emma Azalea Hackley's collection called The Colored Girl Beautiful, and Charlotte Hawkins Brown's The Correct Thing to Do, to Say, and to Wear in 1941. And so how we're really thinking about lives, but who is shaping these lives and how. I think in chapter 2, which is called Dream Poetics and Possibilities in Black Girlhood Aesthetics, about girlhood before and during the Harlem Renaissance. So Zora Neale Hurston, her depiction of Janie and Janie Crawford, and their eyes are watching God, who's trying to find her true girlhood, her own true nature. She thinks she's looking for it in marriage, but she really finds it within herself and her sisterhood circle. Well, her one good friend, her one good friend. Everybody wasn't right, but her one good friend. And then I think in chapter 3 about protests and social movements called Move Girlhood and Social Protest, the role of children in the Children's March in spring of 1963 in Birmingham, the integration of schools in the South. There's one narrative called This Promise of Change, One Girl's Story in the Fight for School Equality. And it's Joanne Allen Boyce talking about integrating schools in Clinton, Tennessee, and what she really loves about her town, even having restrictions placed upon her and what she can do. And then we also have Ntozake Shange's Betsy Brown, which is about a girl who's forced to integrate schools in St. Louis. We have Elaine Brown's Taste of Power, her account of growing up in North Philadelphia, even before her days with the Black Panther Party, and Assata Shakur, who grew up in segregated Wilmington, North Carolina. Before her narrative of activism started circulating, she writes about being with her grandparents at Carolina Beach and her grandparents roping off a parking lot that they owned because it was what they could say, people couldn't do. They were being told they couldn't do so much. That was their parking lot, and they would make people turn around so they couldn't park on their land. So Jacqueline Woodson's Brown Girl Dreaming, thinking about time with her grandparents in Greenville, South Carolina, that was very different than being with her parents in the North and in Ohio and in New York City. And so really trying to navigate these narratives of segregation, but where she felt free in spaces where her grandparents could be free too. And then just 2 more little points. I think about radical creativity in a chapter called Create, and how this idea of writing and poetry and circulating even fictional narratives helps rewrite negative depictions of Black families, women, and girls. And so sometimes fiction is the way that we imagine better worlds. And so by women writing these narratives of Black girls that turned out better than sometimes their real lives, it led us on a pathway of thinking what could be different and how. And then chapter 5, Build, from Black Girl Magic to Afrofutures. I return to Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye and Sapphire's Push to confront social issues that we hear and think about in policy discussions. What is needed for youth? What is needed for Black girls to promote equity and social justice? And so we think a lot about these terms, and we write statements, we write narratives, but also what does it mean to do that through imagining Black girl futures? And so I even think about Amy Sherrill's painting, All Things Bright and Beautiful, and she's the one that painted Michelle Obama's portrait, and how we think about what it means to be bright and beautiful in a visual narrative. I bring in Beyonce's 2020 visual album, Black is King, and Blue Ivy and that song, Brown Skin Girl, which connects the joy of childhood to journeys through womanhood. And then I return to this idea of the appearance of magic, which I say is actually representations of endurance and more than resilience, and how that comes back up in conversations about reading play as resistance, where I started us thinking about, which considers the histories of Black childhood and play in connection with the significance of imagination. And so the book asks the question, what do Black girl narratives look like as they're described, as they're illustrated, and as they're representative of the fullness of their or our lives? What is written in the stories and by the bodies of Black girls? And ultimately, I use the select lives of Black girls to expand on how we can offer a further examination into their creative lives and practices. So how we go into the interiority of Black girlhood in order to learn, understand, explore, and ultimately to play. And so I want to invite Dr. Meggs, Michelle, and Joy into conversation. We have some questions for each other. And so I'm going to throw it to y'all, and then we'll keep talking.
Janica, your book is so beautiful. I have to say, first of all. So thank you for taking us through that journey. One part that I love in the introduction, and I have to call attention to it, where you said, I write this because people think that Black girls are loud, but at times I don't think we are loud enough. And that is the ethos of Messy Conversations, that we're not loud enough. And so I love that you added that piece right there, because Black women are intelligent yet provocative, and not in the way that society always tells us we are, but in the way that we imagine ourselves to be. So thank you for writing this book on light and on legacies, and it's certainly beautiful. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Michelle.
One of the things that, as you were talking, I was writing notes when you talked about Black girls imagining. And one of the things that I think is so critical, in order for Black girls to imagine a future, a futurity, is for them to also have the stories of the Black women and girls who came before them. That is absolutely critical. And that's one of the things that you talk about in the prologue of your book, about how Black girls see themselves in literature and what they're learning from their parents, specifically from their mothers. And I had written a note as I was reading, it's on page 14, and you talked about looking at what is passed down to Black children, specifically girls, with the world around them. And I wrote down intergenerational knowledge sharing, which is so critical. And I think in order for Black girls to imagine themselves in the future, there has to be a base for them to start from. There has to be something, there has to be some material for them to begin to construct what a future looks like based on what has already been done, so that they continue to build upon, right? Not in a sense of throwing away what was, looking at what was and how can I build on it. And I think that is how we can begin to talk about futurity. And I love how in the book you weave in, discuss, and expand on how literature about Black women and Black girls is so central into that. Especially my favorite novel, Beloved, not Beloved, The Bluest Eye, Toni Morrison. I love Beloved too. And Pecola Breedlove, and how her last name tells you what the family lacked that contributed to her ability to thrive. They did not breed love, which did not enable not only the family to see the beauty that they themselves possessed, but they were unable to offer her that love, to begin to construct a narrative around her own beauty, but then begin to build a future for herself. And so as you were talking, I was thinking, what can contribute to Black girl futurity? It's love and our ability to love ourselves, breed love amongst each other, and build into a future with that. So
I love that. N.K. Jemisin has a book, How Long Till Black Future Month. And in it, she writes about this idea of how depressing it was to think that people didn't think her people had a future. And so like even that moving from, history to a future. And I love that you use Pecola Breedlove, breeding love, as something that can happen, can shift, can change. So that's amazing. And she's one of Pecola Breedlove is one of the characters that, you write about and you can't help but look at the trauma and look at the pain, but you want something else to come out of that, right? And you see her friends, you see Claudia and Frida McTeer trying to figure out, okay, well, what can be different from us, right? What can our flowers grow? There's a line about the marigolds not blooming in 1940. Like, how can the flowers grow? And so I think that's a central question too. We're trying to grow flowers.
Mhm.
What do we need to
Mhm.
do? What needs to be different? What
And then the Manigot
There's
line. I
also
think-
been this resurgence of
Mhm.
self-love.
Mhm.
Yes.
I think there has certainly been, an invigorated sense of love, especially, for Black women and especially for Black girls. When you talk
Mhm.
about that Black girl magic, just the definition of magic, it's almost something you can't quite put your finger on.
Right.
Mhm.
And so, when we talk about that intergenerational, those stories and, and the journeys that our mothers and that our grandmothers have gone through. And Janica, when of course, when you mentioned the literature, when we look to the Zoras and the Alice and, and Michelle, as you were talking and brought up love, I thought about Bell Hooks and All About Love. And she says, to know love, we have to tell the truth to ourselves and others.
Mhm.
And that's where it starts.
Yeah.
So this
Mhm.
resurgence of self-love, because
Mhm.
I don't believe it's a novel concept
Mhm.
as Black women.
Mhm.
I just believe that it is being celebrated
Mhm.
in a way that I feel as if I am seeing from the collective versus just a few of us.
Mhm.
And I think it's also love in spite of,
Mhm.
because a lot of these
That's very-
narratives you look to like separate. Well, if she's going through that, she can't possibly. But Jacob
Absolutely.
is loving her kids through that little crack, even though she can't be with them, and she's still
Mhm.
holding where she is, but imagining something different. And so I
Mhm.
think of how we hold those together.
And
Absolutely.
also looking at the Black girl magic, and we're talking about resilience in that, but and I think in that we're also asking at what cost, right? Because resilience and our ability to bounce back comes at a cost.
Mhm.
And so if we're talking about the importance of love, if we're talking about the importance of centering narratives, if we're talking about the necessity of radical creativity, we also have to ask the question of the cost,
Mhm.
right? And what are we willing to pay for that? What are we willing to sacrifice for that? Because I don't think that in considering that always when we look at Black girl magic, we don't ask what is the cost of that, because it's not free.
Absolutely.
And so how do we manage that? How do we manage the cost for that? Because our magic is in our resilience, in our endurance, in our willingness to go to the end. But we have to ask the critical question, what is the cost? What is the price we're willing to pay? However, if we are immersed in a community of women who
Mhm.
are truth tellers,
Mhm.
and who are honest about the cost, I think that we can still work our magic without depleting ourselves. And I think that's the additional conversation that is necessary. And I think that there are lessons that come out of that through the texts and also through the theorizing that is happening within this book.
Absolutely.
There was so much magic, it put me out the room.
I was wondering what happened.
I know, but it was so good. We just kept going.
Of
Right. And
course.
also, I think also in The Bluest Eye, we get a different machination of what love and self-love looks like through the Maginot Line, those three women,
Mhm.
right?
And they love her.
And they love her,
Yeah.
right? These women where love was not expected to be found, as well as in the book Precious, right?
Yeah.
The same gender loving women who
Mhm.
show her love
Mhm.
in places that wasn't expected,
Right.
right? And so what does love look like?
Right.
And how do we know it when we see it,
Well, that's a great
right?
question.
If we're immersed in community, we are able to, if we're immersed in a community that is both truth-telling,
Mhm.
in love, and honest, we will be able to identify what love looks like, that is interested in restoration, that is interested in wholeness, that is interested in balance.
I think those key terms that you brought up when you said what is love, and you said restoration and balance, Michelle, because I think that there is there's an idea and a concept in the Black community that pain equates to love, or that you have to experience trauma before you experience joy. And my co-scholar and I, Dr. Deborah Smith, also at UNC Charlotte, we spent some time during the pandemic, really discovering, what do our souls need? Right? What do our souls need? And that's where we term the coin soul labor. And it's not meant to be work, because just like you said, Michelle, we've done enough work, right? We've toiled. But it is meant to nourish our souls. It's authenticity that, as you said, it's restoration, it restores. And I love to hear from other sister scholars, how they nourish their souls, how we continue to excel, but also how we replenish. Because oftentimes I believe that there is this idea that, well, you have to sacrifice, you have to put in the work, you need to look worn down, you can't be mentally and emotionally healthy. Well, did you cry today? If you didn't cry today, you didn't do anything.
If you're not exhausted and laid out,
if you're not exhausted, exactly. If your spirit
Exactly.
isn't heavy laden, well, certainly you didn't do work. But Beyonce said it's okay for us to have a cozy, soft life.
It is, right? And how many Black women and girls have gone to the grave early because
Absolutely.
we have worked ourselves literally to death, right?
Absolutely.
And who does that help? And I think that oftentimes, not everyone, but oftentimes we get this idea that we have to give our last, that love operates out of a deficit perspective. And that is the narrative that we unfortunately pass down. And that is not liberative. This idea that sacrifice is necessary, that sacrifice is needed for liberation. Absolutely not.
Absolutely.
And then when you look at it from a spiritual perspective, how much are Black women going to have to be on the cross in place of Christ, if you're a Christian, in order to get free? I'm the first one who will come and pull the nails out of your hands and your feet and say, let's go. Over. This is over.
Come on down. Come on
Right.
down.
Womanist theologians, womanist scholars, those who are immersed in womanism, like myself, believe that we have sacrificed enough. There's no need. It was one and done. Let's move on. Right. And we have to move ourselves out of this idea that we literally have to lay down our lives in order for our work to always mean something, right? This is not liberative. And we also need to understand that what liberation and freedom looks like for women is different. Right. And we also and we also have to release ourselves from the shackles of respectability politics. Right? Because that is absolutely a chokehold for many of us, that we have to release the ways in which respectability politics calls on us to believe that somehow we're deficient. Because it calls
we have to make ourselves matter.
Exactly. And when in fact we already matter, but we have to believe that within ourselves. This larger culture, right, wants to convince us that unless we are worshiping at the altar of white supremacy, that we're not inherently good. And in fact, we are already good.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because when we talk to to white supremacy, and when we talk to the patriarchy, you know, one of the tenets of womanism is, of course, you know, the love of self of Black women, but also, of course, you know, the love of Black women, Black men, excuse me. And I think that's the other piece that we have to begin to teach our Black girls to understand that self-love will supersede any relationship, whole or broken, that you may come upon as you progress and as you get older. And it almost feels as if the thread of the conversation surrounding liberation and surrounding light and joy is love. Because
womanism,
yeah.
but
Go right ahead.
womanism if you're following Alice Walker, as she coined and defined the phrase, right, also gives Black women room to push back, right, and with violence if necessary to protect themselves. Hence, Miss Sophia tells Celie, you better bash Mister's head in and think about heaven later. Hello. Womanism is not always about, it is about, you know, peace and love, and let's get along, and let's roll together as community to make things happen. But it's also about, you better bash Mister's head in and think about heaven later. This man is absolutely oppressing and abusing you, and you don't have to take that, right? So it offers that as well. And it also gives Black women the space to decide what it looks like for them.
Yes.
And that there's no one way to be a Black woman. You have the space to define it for yourself. You have the space to push back, and that you don't have to accept any kind of treatment. It leaves room for spirit. For those who don't know, I'm also an ordained Baptist minister, so you'll get some of that in there as well. It leaves room for spirit, however you define that for yourself, and understanding the necessity of integrating all parts of yourself into your own freedom movement, and that it happens in community with women and men. It gives women room to critique our men and say, now, wait a minute. Your participation in the patriarchy not only harms me, but it harms you, because it limits your ability to be all that you can be, because it tells you that you can only be one way. Right. And so that's not what we want, because if we're going to walk in this liberation, I need you to get free too.
And I love that you bring in the color purple, because, you know, Celie is sharing some knowledge. And
That's Michelle's favorite.
Yeah, look, and her message on the color purple is one of my favorite, right?
I love it.
How,
I love
you know,
when
it
you
doesn't
quote.
have to come from outside. It's like, this is what I'm living, and this is what I don't want, you know, to be passed on to you. And so
exactly. And you
change
see the
each other's
resistance
narratives.
happening. When she spits in the lemonade, you see the resistance happening slowly and surely. When you know, where's Miss Celie? She fixing a shave mister, right? We see these spaces of resistance, right? And these are the ways in which I think that Black women and girls have always found space to push back against those who would want to encroach on their freedom. There's a poet from New Orleans, first name Sunny, her last name leaves me, but you can find her on YouTube. And she issues this poem after Katrina, and she talks about the ways in which slave women would poison the master's family. And she talks about, go ahead and sip on this stew because death never tasted so sweet, right? There are many ways in which Black enslaved women would garner their freedom, right? And so these ways that Black women and girls have sought out to liberate themselves in more ways than one. This is part of the light and legacies that we're talking about. Some walked away from the plan. Sonny Patterson, thank you, Asa Wilder. Yes, Sonny Patterson. If you look her up on YouTube, you will find her poem. how they walked away, ran away, right? Steal away
Yeah.
from places where their souls were being crushed. And that's one of the things that I love about your book, is that it is a reminder that this is part of our legacy. This is our legacy too. That this too is also Black girl magic. And I'm a hush because I just been talking.
No. We learn something new every time. I tell you that every time we have a conversation.
And we have some
I just-
conversations.
We do.
I just take notes and write my dissertation. Okay. I say, Allah, document. But-
Cite Black women.
Exactly. To the point about being operating with a sense of radical, right, acts of transformation, if I may. I think that it's also poignant to recognize that Black women are not monolithic, right? And so the way that, that one woman operates and is loud, right, maybe isn't the other, isn't the language of every Black woman. And I think it's really important to note that, because I often have conversations, with my girlfriends, and they say, well, Joy, but I'm not as direct as you. And I think, well, you may not be verbally direct, but I've seen you direct in other ways that's just as, transformative as how direct I may be, as a writer and as a scholar. And so I think that that's very important when we really are talking about Black girl dreams. I think it's important to encourage and to meet these Black girls and to meet little Joy where she is. Because, Janica, that was one of our first conversations when we had the commonality surrounding creativity and creativity as a cousin to our intellect. Because we shared that I went to a performing arts high school. I know you as well went to a fine arts school. And, and we talked about how creativity as a young girl is celebrated. But often the older you become, your creativity is looked at as someone who, who wanders and is trying to figure herself out. And so I think about myself and again, just, little Joy and some of the things that my mother told me, back to what Michelle was saying earlier about just that intergenerational, that knowledge, those stories, those journeys. And I really started thinking about, what did she inject into me as a young girl that made me become the woman that I am? And the one thing that I can say is it was an endless ambition. There was never a no, you can't, or no, you shouldn't. Now, don't get me wrong. Okay, I am a PK, so there was a lot of no, you shouldn'ts. But that was just about not talking to boys on the telephone. But I was a rebel with a cause. I just took a little time to figure out my cause. But that endless ambition, and that she allowed me to dream as big as I wanted to, encouraging my creativity as a writer, but always gently but firmly reminding me about the significance of my intellect, so that both were the prize, both were respected. So yes, little Joy, you can certainly be creative. You can certainly be wild but soft. But remember that that education begets freedom.
I love that. I love that. I want to move to some of the comments in the chat, which I think connect.
Oh, okay.
We'll keep going. So Jacqueline Rose had a comment: soul labor replenishment for me happens in sharing with others. It is key to ensuring a legacy, a healing, a self-love continues. And so that connects to this idea of generative and regenerating.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Soul labor is about engaging in authentic dialogue, because the more transparent we are with ourselves, then the more transparent and vulnerable we are allowed to be, and we have permission to be with one another. So
It's
my
good.
co-scholar is on the call as well. So
Yeah, Deb's.
shameless plug.
Yeah. Yeah. And then Sydney's comment, I love that idea of creating space to push back because our own colors of grief create different narratives as to what being a whole Black woman means. And I love this idea of colors of grief because it's not even just one thing or one color. And, you know, how we're grieving multiple things every day while living, while looking for joy, while embracing life. And so also feel free to share if if one of those is your comment. More from what you were thinking, what you're experiencing.
I love that. I'm just placing a heart. Sydney's my doctoral colleague. We're in the same cohort.
Thank you for being here. And come off mute. Anyone who has a question, comment, provocation.
Thank you so much. We have about 10 more minutes, so feel free to jump into the conversation now before we formally let folks go at 5, but then we will continue a little deeper conversation after that for 10 or 15 minutes. So you don't have to write it in the chat, but if you'd like to, feel free.
I would love to say that this was really good because I've been mourning lately. I've been listening to a lot of the talk about the way books are being taken away in Florida. I work in a university doing work on race. And it's been a really hard summer to think about how we're going to do our curriculums. I've been having to read the Supreme Court case to see how we need to maneuver our recruiting strategies. And I think it's a good reminder to start in a place of love for ourselves, because otherwise this can feel really burdensome. And there's just been so much hate recently, just in the comments. And, I have colleagues, I'm in theater, so I have colleagues who've recently, 6 major Black women leaders have been fired or left their jobs, and it feels like a really hard time. So I just want to say thank you for this conversation. My children were listening. It was really helpful and beautiful.
Thank you. And that's our dear sister scholar friend, Kaya Dunn as well. Thank you for helping us think about this moment and all the complexity there. Javon adds, do you want me to read or do you want to bring it into the conversation?
Sure. Hello, you guys. I had just said, thinking of Carly and the case of her missing and then finding out, I don't know if you guys saw earlier, but her lawyer had spoken, said that she did lie about it and don't know all pertaining as to why, but as a Black man in America, thinking how can I be more of service to helping, my sisters, my aunts, my mom, my grandmothers, protecting Black women more and not, without, everything that comes in with mental health alone, just in the Black community, and then being ostracized or being, how the conservatives will say something critical of Black women, especially when it comes to Black missing women or Indigenous women of color, always gone missing, and you don't see as much news footage about it. So any comments that you guys have that would help?
Yeah, a lot of pain surrounding that need to represent the story in a particular way, but also, as we all know, there are Black women who are missing and who are not returned to us and who are not found. And so, the complexity of that narrative of having to do that or feeling they have to do that, but even, the impact of us wanting a positive outcome, social media, I'm like, oh, I have people in Hoover. I have, so that collectivity that came around that, I don't want to be lost, but also, thinking about what is needed in that moment so that people can be seen. And so the Black women, Black girls can be seen without the creation of other narratives. And so, a lot of pain around that having to happen to be looked at too.
I was looking at Javon's question, and thank you for asking that. He said, how can I as a Black man help protect her and other Black women? Thank you just for asking that question, Javon, because just the fact that you are asking is, that's of course the bare minimum, but we appreciate you for doing that. I think I again can't speak for all of us, but I would say in conversations that I often have with my girlfriends, it's just about not being judgmental.
Mhm.
And so what, Janica, similarly to what you just said, and that without creating other issues,
Mhm.
and it's obvious, bless her heart. And I know that's the South.
The
So we
Southern.
speak from the heart.
When we don't know
Um,
what else to say.
And we
Mhm.
don't,
Yeah.
It's blessed.
because obviously, yes, there is a mental, health issue there. But what if there's not a mental health issue? What if
Mhm.
right now she just hates her life?
Yeah.
And she couldn't just say, I just need to disappear for 24 hours and take a moment to myself. What if she didn't have someone around her? I remember her boyfriend said, oh, I would have done the same thing, for her that, or I know she would have done the same thing for me that I did for her. But what if she needed to escape from him?
Mhm.
You never
And
know the whole story.
you never
Mm.
know the whole story. And so
Mhm.
I'm appreciative. I sometimes have to call my significant other and I have to say to him, hey, today is just not a day I feel like talking.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And if you can support me by just giving me a little bit of space, sometimes that's all we need. We just need to be able to communicate and be vulnerable and not have to always be the strong Black woman.
Mhm.
That's that we're tired.
Yes. Thank you for saying that, Joy, because that's what I was thinking. Where and how often are Black women given the space to just kind of fall apart?
Mhm.
That
Mhm.
strong Black woman thing is real. And I think Carly Russell's situation is what you see when it goes terribly wrong and you feel like you don't have the space or the place to fall apart, and not be. Um, I think that is a manifestation of when Black women don't have safe spaces
Mhm.
to go to. She was working at a spa. And she's a nursing student.
She's
Uh,
caring for.
Nursing school is hard and it is taxing. I'm not making any excuses. I'm just saying what I know to be true. What happens, that the strong Black woman thing is difficult, and you say that you're having a tough time and you need some help, and the responses from people around you is, girl, you got it. And you're saying that you don't. And the response is, you got it. You're a strong Black woman. And clearly you're saying that you don't, and you don't have anywhere to turn. And so your mind begins to figure out, how do I escape? I'm
Yeah.
not saying this was the right thing to do. I'm saying that this is what she decided to do. The other side of the coin is folks weren't looking for missing Black women and girls anyway.
Right.
This is not new. They weren't looking for us. Right. So the one time that they do, now all of a sudden everybody wants to throw their hands up and say, well, this is why they don't. What a horrible thing to say,
Right.
because we were already clear that they haven't been. When Black women and girls go missing, they do not get the same attention as when a white female or white child goes missing. They are still talking about JonBenet Ramsey. Still,
No.
right?
Bless her heart.
Still talking about her missing, right? And so I see both sides of the coin. I don't know what's happening in her life, but for her to have to come up with such a scenario and such a ruse, there has to be more. And so I'm just extending grace to her,
Absolutely.
and also to her family. That's what I have.
Absolutely.
Where does the protection come from?
Exactly. So I'm
Yeah.
not engaging in the bashing, none
Same.
of that. I'm just extending grace. I'm glad that she did come back safely, because that is what the prayers were, and they were answered.
That's what they
That's it.
Same. Because Black women's mental health isn't a joke,
Mhm.
and it's not funny. And I think I've seen some things on social media that are just, it's not laughable.
Mhm,
It isn't. I mean, she needed 48 hours of quiet and couldn't get it at home.
mhm.
I mean, she
Where
obviously
the safe space
a
is.
safe space. There was
Mhm.
an escape that needed to happen. And she didn't have the ability to be able to escape, and she didn't feel free to do so. And I'm saying she, but the
Collective.
collective.
The collective.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah,
Where
the
do we
collective.
find it? Mhm.
Thank you for this time. Those of you who must go, thanks for being with us. Thanks for enjoying this incredible conversation with these lovely folks. And we'll just continue to move on. And we have some more comments in the chat. I see Clarence and then Stephanie.
Yeah. So two questions we'll put out there. We'll keep chatting. For Dr. Michelle, why is there such resistance in the Black Missionary Baptist Church to having women in the pulpit? And then from Stephanie, how do I find joy again when I'm burnt out from anti-racist work? I am so burnt out and feel like I don't want to fight anymore. Dr. Michelle, start.
I don't know why there's, well, patriarchy,
Mm.
right? That is the main answer. I have been lucky in that in the Missionary Baptist Church that I was licensed and ordained in, I have been blessed to have a pastor who believed in ordaining women, Black women. So that is the only experience I know. But I'm clear that across the tradition that is not an experience that a lot of women have. Patriarchy is the one, a misinterpretation of the text is another. Around Paul and saying that women should be silent in the church. When Paul wrote that, he was being sarcastic, right? Because clearly women were the ones supporting the ministry of Jesus during his time on earth. Women were preaching and teaching in these churches during the time of Jesus and after Jesus. So how is it that in Jesus's time this was allowed and the women were doing that and working to spread the gospel? And then Paul comes and now all of a sudden this isn't the thing that is happening. So I asked the people who believe this, well, what did Jesus say? And if you can't answer, then let's move along. I'm what I call a ratchet womanist. It's a coin that I termed. I coined that during my own doctoral research, and I've written about it. So I'm all the way live when it comes to my womanism, when it comes to my preaching and teaching and my scholarship. So if you're looking for somebody who will absolutely kick the door in, quoting Cardi B, Meg Thee Stallion, Beyonce, Lizzo, Little Kim, Foxy Brown, I am the one. And it shows up in my preaching. I quote The Color Purple when I preach. You might see The Bluest Eye come up. I am that one. I believe in authenticity. I believe in the loudness of Black women and girls as being joyful, as being happiness, as praising. I don't believe in the silencing of Black women and girls. I think that we've been silenced for too long and that our love needs to speak loudly because our joy has been tamped down and silenced. So I hope that answers your question, but that's the answer I have.
Thank you, Dr. Meggs. And moving to the question about finding joy of being burnt out. And I think we can all speak to that, creating space for joy. And I'll, just going back to the book, I was looking for where these women in my first book, where did women find freedom? In this book, how are they passing on these secrets of creating space? And it really is that, like how blocking out, what is preventing the, what we can call it radical creativity, we can call it, ratchet womanism, ratchet girlhood, but just what is allowing us to, break these barriers to say, you should be still, you should be quiet, you should be this, you should be that. And so I think that fighting that burnout is literally creating the space for something else. And my sister scholars and I have a presentation that's going to be a journal. You're not burnt out, they're setting you on fire. So also knowing when you're being set on fire and you're feeling like, oh, well, it's me, I'm burnt out. But, changing that narrative to
Mhm.
if somebody's literally, doing something to impact you. It's not
Mhm.
just that you are, individually navigating something, but something is provoking that. So acknowledging too.
I think even when we say creating safe spaces for one another, is wonderful. Having your person at your university, Stephanie, your own sister scholar, your own friend who you can go to that is your safe space. And I think that that's terrific. But why shouldn't we be the priority? Why shouldn't we choose what makes us feel light? And it could be travel for one woman, that makes you feel light. But I think it's so important to give, again, to use this word, permission to embrace your life in a way that maybe your day to day does not always allow, whether it's yoga, whether it's a workout, whether it's a glass of wine, whether it's finding a peaceful lounge. And I know I'm giving very practical applications, but however you choose to define, again, your soft life, right? Because you need that rest and relaxation after anti-racist work. Whew.
Mm.
I have a professor, Dr. Wiggin, bless his heart. He says, we pause here.
Yeah.
Because after you say the word racism, you need to pause.
Yeah.
So of course you're burnt out from anti-racist work. It's exhausting.
Mhm.
Of course you don't want to fight anymore, and you shouldn't have to fight anymore. But however you choose to define that, know that your soul deserves to relax into all the feels. Create those boundaries for yourself that make sense for yourself, and what that looks like. But I know for me, I've really just, created the life that Joy needs and that Joy wants. And yes, I'm referring third person intentionally.
But also Joy little J and Joy
Yes.
big J. What does little J Joy
Yes.
need to exist?
Absolutely.
Because,
Yes. Yes.
you need-
Yeah. I never fell in love with my name until the past 3 years.
Yes.
And that's
Everywhere.
when
Joy
I really-
everywhere.
Yes, that's when I really realized, okay, yeah, I do need some joy in my life, some ecstasy.
Yeah.
And so that would be my response, Stephanie, for you, is certainly to find those little moments of ecstasy, those little moments of joy. Because yeah, anti-racist work is hard and it is damn exhausting. So
I'll
Yeah.
throw in when I was writing then she was 7 then, she's 10 now, my daughter, when she was learning at home, she'd say, it's time for recess, mommy, and was serious about it because at whatever time in her classroom, in our house, let's go play. And at first I'd be like, oh, let me finish. No, it's time for recess. Let's go to recess. Let's go play. And that's still a thought I had today. When is it time to play? And not, negotiate it, not navigate it, but that's what your soul, that's what your body, that's what your spirit needs.
I love that. When is it time to play?
Go to recess.
Go to recess. Yeah.
I think asking the question for me, what's your why? And coming back to the thing that drives you, and then doing the things that nurture your drive. And I think that Joy and Danica have offered some really wonderful ways, because as Joy said, anti-racism work is difficult. It can be soul crushing sometimes to do that work, because you're dealing with an issue that was created by human beings. And it takes a lot of work to undo, because you're changing heart and you're changing soul and you're changing mind. And those are very difficult things to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would offer that as you're discovering what's your why in the work that you're doing, that you nurture yourself in the midst of it. Anything that requires you to pull on your heart, your mind, and your soul, there's reparative work that needs to happen. You have to continue to go back and shore those things back up. You have to go back and you have to rebuild, you have to repair, because you're engaging in some serious work. You're engaging in some real battles. And so that is what I would offer. Sometimes you have to step back, go find some other things, go for a walk, go for a run, go sip some tea, go do something else that is completely unrelated to that work. Yes, I know it's everywhere, but there are some spaces people are talking about anime. Go sit there. Go people watch. Go do something completely unrelated to it so that your mind has a chance to reset and refresh itself, so that you're ready for the next time you enter into the space. That's what I would offer.
That's great.
Absolutely.
I just want to add on to that. A lot of times, even when we find ourselves in the midst of it, I just kind of tell people, you might want to back up a little bit, because I'm about to put out these flames that you're trying to, so you might get a little wet, because I need to douse myself
Yes.
right before I jump right back in here, because you don't feel like you have enough time. But that 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 30 seconds, and if they get a little wet and get offended, that's okay. As long as you put out your fire.
Yeah.
It's okay. You might get triggered on. You might
And you just keep it moving, keep it stepping. Because sometimes you're in those situations and that's just what you have to do.
Absolutely.
And then you have to deal with it, and you deal with it later on or the next day or when you get home. And that's just part of it. That's just part of what we do. And I love how in those moments, those are the moments where we find ourselves, where a lot of times we're in public or we're we're doing that because we know that we have a set of eyes that's watching us, that we're setting an example, we're setting that precedence, as you said. There are ways that I am sometimes going to react when my daughters are present than sometimes when I'm alone. Sometimes the variance isn't going to be that much. Sometimes it'll be a little bit different if my mom is present, because I don't want her getting me later either. But but whatever the case may be,
right,
we just have to do the best, like you said, the best that we can in the moment, and make it the best scenario that we can walk away from.
Right.
Yeah. So
that's good. That's really good. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for being here today. This was awesome. I'm so glad I was here. Thank you.
Oh, we're so glad you were here.
We're glad you're here as well. Thank you so much for
Absolutely.
sharing that.
We're so glad you were here. You know what? You said something and it made me think of that dialogical relationship that Patricia Hill Collins talks about, when you were saying that, sometimes who you are in your mother identity, is different from who you have to be in your daughter identity. And even sometimes, toggling all those can be very, very exhausting. And so, that's why, again, so important to go back and, and take that time to really explore what the quiet space looks like, that quiet space of restoration, what that looks like for your soul, because our identities as women, I mean, my goodness, so nuanced, sometimes it feels like every conversation we have, I know I've really tried to put concerted focus in being able to just live authentic to who I am, as opposed to feeling like I'm dancing into different and performing into different personalities, because that requires performance is exhausting.
Yes.
And so, when we're at work, sometimes we feel like, we're in performance mode. And so where do we go to take off the mask? Where do we go, to remove the costume? Where do we lay those down? Where do we lay that down?
Where do we lay that down? That's a spiritual. It's very true. It's very true, especially for workspaces and mom spaces and school spaces. And I think what I have found, at least for myself, is trying to maintain that consistency so that I don't feel like I'm wearing a mask.
Absolutely. Yes.
And that takes a lot less effort. But I know that there are things that you find yourself that you feel strongly about as this topic goes on to discuss, that it will catch you off guard sometimes.
Mhm.
As a mama bear, you can be caught off guard. Whereas if it's a situation just yourself, it's a little bit different.
Sure, sure.
Finding that space, as you've pointed out, and even with the list of books that you've pointed out, and Sealy that you've pointed out, it means a lot to have literature like this for us to reference
Mhm.
ourselves and continue that story for those that come behind us. Because I invited a group of African-American women, an association that's from here in San Diego, North County, San Diego, and they have a mentoring program. And the mentoring program is junior high and high school girls. And I invited them to come today so that they can hear you guys speak, because we need it. You know, we need to continue this conversation, and the girls need to hear it as many times as possible. So I hope they were here today, and I'm taking the book with me to the next session so that we can talk about it.
And we'll come to them.
Hey, there we go. There we go. Dr. Gills, you have to say that we will come to them so it's written in stone on a tablet.
We'll make it through.
There we go. We'll write it in stone for us. Thank you.
I want to thank you all. We had so many folks join us today that obviously from the chat and from what people are sharing, that this was a wonderful experience. This was truly what I see as a labor of love from the three of you. Thank you, sister scholars, for sharing your experience and your ideas and insights, and of course, this beautiful book with us. And we look forward to having you back and more from you.
Absolutely. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Everybody buy the book.
Yes, by the
Bye,
book.
Janica's book.
And please join us next week for our last messy conversation of this quarter, where we go back in time and think about the last 3 years of messy conversations. We're so grateful to have guests like this and so many others who've really shaped our work together.
Thank you so
And
much for having
Janica,
us.
It's our pleasure. Thank you. Thank you,
Yes.
everyone.
Michelle,
Thank you so much.
Joy, Janica, join us next week, because it's going to be very interesting conversation for looking back over our last 3 years. If you
Oh,
can, we'd
congratulations.
love for you to join. And
Mhm.
invite one person.
Okay.
An amazing labor of love on your part, on the team's part. So thank you all.
Yes, thank you.
Thank
We're
you.
going to
my
get you to that sister, that mentee group that Jacqueline's working with. And thank you, Jacqueline, for inviting the girls and the mentors.
Thank you for having us. And everybody have a good night.
Take care, everyone. Be well.
Take care. I'll
Thanks,
talk to you
Sequoia.
later.
Thank you again, Dr. Parker Kills, for having us in space.
Nice to meet everybody too.
Okay, you as
course.
well. Bye, everyone.
Great night.